Here we are. What's going on, y'all? Welcome to another beautiful episode and another beautiful day in the neighborhood here. So we're just going to hop right in today. This is ultimately lesson 8. And I really don't know what these are until I get there because, I've probably said over and over again, but I kind of do these week by week. So whatever the last week is, I let that marinate. And then sometimes it is kind of very in line with where I think it is going. And then sometimes it's like it ends up being this totally new direction or kind of this, this little side shoot, this pit stop in order to kind of come back in line with the full thing. Because like I've said, we're really building out this system to ultimately help you create these different really just this overarching plan for your life to help you to express your genius in ways that are of the highest level of service to yourself and others, which, when you really get down into it, are just other aspects of your self, capital SELF, self, which is just all of what you are, the totality of what you are. That's why they say that to give is to receive, because when you are giving to yourself, which is a receiving. And even at like a more kind of basic level, the more you give, the more you help other people get what they want, the more this natural flow of energy, this natural current of exchange, of this reciprocity, the more that it just naturally happens. And now, again, this is like a side note, but here we go. A lot of it is based on your intent. So, if you're giving from a place of an expectation that you are trying to get something in return, then the intent behind that is actually coming from this place of lack, of not having enough, of this, placing conditions upon things. And that's really, and this kind of really ties into the whole bigger picture of things, because that intent that is behind it is really kind of the energetic signature that gets mirrored back. So if the intent is coming from this conditional place, or this place of lack, or this place of scarcity, or this place of fear, this place of unworthiness, if it's coming from that place, then that is what is going to be mirrored back to you. And that's why, you can intellectually, you can give and kind of give in this. And sometimes we don't even realize that we're doing this. And this is what can get us in different kinds of trouble, because a lot of times the intent behind it is something that we don't even really recognize within ourselves. Like, we even make ourselves believe that we're coming from this one place, when in actuality we're actually, coming from this more even deeper rooted subconscious or unconscious place, which again could be, most of the time, or really, all the time, when you really boil it down, is coming from this place of fear, which is functionally the opposite of love, because fear perpetuates separation. As if you're afraid of something, the only way that you can really be afraid of something is if you objectify that thing and you see it as something that is different from you, something that is outside of you. And therefore, because it is outside of you, then there is a justification for this thing, or this, it could even be an idea, person, place, thing, idea, whatever the fear is projected upon. That thing can then become something that gets mirrored back to you. So it's like you project this thing out and then it gets mirrored back to you. And a lot of that, again, it's like it's coming from essentially who you are and your own fundamental beliefs. But yeah, but essentially when you fear something, then the only way something can be the only way something can attack you is if there's this illusion that it is separate from you, and therefore now there's this thing that's outside of you that can do something to you. Whereas the opposite of that, of love, is this unifying force where, the more that you, and really, again, it in my experience, it begins with you and finding these things within yourself, and finding the fear of these different aspects of yourself, because again, it's all fundamentally, it's all one thing. So we end up, anything that is going on internally, we end up projecting it, knowingly, unknowingly, we project it out into what we identify as the external world of, people, places, things, objects, and then that then gets mirrored back to us. So it's like, it's just like we're in this big house of mirrors, and we're constantly looking at ourselves, but because there's all these different angles and all these different, all these, like those funny mirrors in the fun houses that make you different shapes and sizes, and, I'll do all sorts of things. It's like we're in this big house of mirrors, and everything that is getting reflected back to us is really, it's just us. But because it may take on a different shape, a different size, a different color, than what we're used to, than what we have the idea of how we identify ourselves, then we don't necessarily recognize it as ourselves, even though it is fundamentally, it is us. It's just a different expression of the totality of who we are. And so the more that you learn to embrace all the different aspects of yourself, the more you begin to see all of those different things when you look out into the world. And that's why, there's a saying, to a Buddha, everyone is a Buddha, and to a Christ, everyone is a Christ. And that's just basically saying, the light that is within you, the light that you're able to cultivate within yourself, and really, just with that light, you're able to dispel the kind of the dark unconscious areas of yourself. The more you bring light into yourself, the brighter that you become. And the brighter that you become, the more brightness, the more light is projected out into the world. And so when you find that light within yourself, when you cultivate that light within yourself, which really, it's not even a cultivation, because it's something that's already here. It's just being able to shine your awareness into the darkness, because that awareness ultimately is the light. You becoming more and more aware of everything that you are and embracing everything that you are is the light that is dispelling the darkness. Now, there's not anything inherently wrong with darkness, because light couldn't exist without darkness. It's the the yin and the yang. It's the complementary opposites, where both are needed to have an experience. And that's kind of like this deeper discussion, but ultimately you can't know yourself without being able to experience all the different parts of yourself, which are really just these manifestations of the complementary opposites, dark and light, and day and night, and hot and cold, and wet and dry. And, you can go on and on and on. But that's what allows this whole experience to be possible. So the brighter that you become because of going through the process of shining the light on all the different aspects of yourself, the light of your awareness, and being willing and having the courage to look at all the different parts of yourself, which is kind of part of this bigger, mythical hero's journey, because a lot of the pain that we experience in our lives, a lot of the challenges that we experience in our lives, or a lot of the essentially the darkness that is within us that then gets projected outside of us, or what we label as outside of us, that then gets reflected back to us, and then we label that as darkness, which is ultimately a part of ourselves. So it's like essentially, it's being able to see the things that are going on around you, and then being able to see yourself in those things. And then when you can kind of see yourself in those things, and that's where kind of the practices of gratitude and compassion, and ultimately just realizing that it's all part of this larger experience. And we wouldn't know good without evil, just like you wouldn't know light without dark. And so this experience is necessary. It's just we have to be willing to look at it all and see the kind of the unifying force that is underlying it all, knowing that these things couldn't exist without one another. And so all that is to say is, like, you see this within yourself, and then the brighter that you become within yourself, the more that light shines through you into everything that you see, and like the brighter everything else becomes. And it's like, if you have a flashlight, and this is, it's you're in charge of how bright that flashlight is, and how much light that it emits, and kind of how big of an area that is lit up through that flashlight. That's kind of your awareness, and that's your power to intentionally brighten that light, which is really just an extension of who you are. So it's like you firstly kind of have to use the flashlight, which is synonymous with your awareness. You have to use that flashlight to look at all the different parts of you. And then the more you look at all the different parts of you, the brighter and brighter that light becomes. And therefore, then when you shine it out into the world, then you're able to, again, just like the darkness gets reflected, it gets projected and then reflected. Same thing is true with the light. The light gets projected and then reflected. And therefore, going back to the saying, to a Buddha, everyone is a Buddha. To a Christ, everyone is a Christ. And so if you want to change the world that you see, then you firstly have to change yourself. And it's not even so much of a changing of who you are, it's just more of a remembering of what you've been the whole time. Because the light has always been there. Because again, if we see darkness, then inherently that means there is light. And you get to choose what you focus on, and what you focus on grows, as well as what you resist persists. So if you're constantly focusing on the negative, the darker aspects of your life, the things that you don't like to see, you're just going to get more of that. And if you just try to avoid and resist those things, they're still just they're not going anywhere. They're just going to be there. Just like your shadow, you can run as far and as fast as you possibly can, but your shadow is just going to be there. And paradoxically, you could use way less effort to dispel your shadow by simply just looking at it, and it's just shining some light on it. That's all that it's asking for you to do. The darkness is begging for the light, just in the same way that that light kind of begs for darkness to allow for its existence. So a little bit of a kind of deeper there, but it ties into what I wanted to really get into today, because when it comes to creating this program for your life, this system for your life, I think it's helpful to kind of know the underlying principles of ultimately how to discover your genius, and then be able to express that in ways that ultimately just feel aligned with who you are. I talked about the intention, and that intention is really the key element, but it's, this is one of those things where you need to marry the two halves of the circle. There's the component of the very kind of holistic view that just, what we could equate with the right brain, as it's so often called, where it's just more holistic and kind of all-encompassing and just kind of sees this big picture. And that's what I would kind of identify as the intention. So it's like if you create an intention, or if you're intentional about your intention, so being, let's say like one of your intentions is I want to be the best that I can be. I want to realize my full potential. And like, those are very powerful intentions. And in my experience, the intention is really the key element of that. It's kind of this, the foundation of everything that's going to be built upon that intention and kind of come from that intention. But just the intention in itself, it doesn't necessarily have any very solid grounding. It needs something to really solidify it. And this is kind of where you marry the other side of it with what we would call the left brain, that's more logical and mathematical and kind of cuts things up. And, in the spiritual community, a lot of times, people like to deify one side and then, consider the other side as something that's not necessary at the best, or at the worst it's kind of vilified. It's seen as this thing that needs to be gotten rid of. And I kind of came from that place for quite a while when I really started to get into this, where it was just very holistic. And, me coming from, which I'm kind of seeing more and more how these things come full circle in my own life, in my own experience. But me seeing that, because I came from a background of being very good at school, and I wouldn't necessarily call that being smart, but I was very good at knowing what I needed to remember to, uphold whatever standard was what's said. So it's, I could pass tests, I could complete assignments, I could essentially do what I was told really well. And therefore I got straight A's. And even when I went into college, which really for me only lasted a semester before I really, I kind of had this like breakthrough of what I really wanted to do with my life, and just had enough courage to follow that. But even then I was kind of on this track of becoming an engineer, because I just always had a knack for math and really just putting things together and seeing patterns, which, I didn't necessarily realize it at the time, but now kind of hindsight, I'm seeing how this all comes together. Because basically being able to not say one side, like the right brain is better or worse than the left brain, which again is, I came from that place for a while when I really started getting into it, where I just completely rejected that part of me that was very structured and very logical and very mathematical, because for so long that was my strength. That's where I lived. And so I went through a period of time where the pendulum swings. So I was on the other side of the spectrum. I'm just very holistic, just very kind of just seeing the big picture of things, but not really having any kind of anchor or grounding to it. And so the intention is kind of that right brain aspect of it, but there needs to be, at least in my experience, like there needs to be some kind of grounding to really make it real. And this is where what we got to do is we need to marry that intention with something that is very grounded and very tangible and very, something that can be easily measured. I'm very surface level, like logical senses. Then I can see that it is real. It is surface level, like logical senses. Then I can see that it is real. It is happening. That it is real. It is happening. Because again, if you say your intention is to realize your full potential, but you haven't really defined what that is, then you don't necessarily have a way to know if you are moving in the right direction, and if you have actually gotten to a place where you have realized that potential. Now, obviously, you may never, realizing your full potential, it's like kind of, seeking perfection. So you may never actually get there, but it is helpful because, again, you'll see because we're really going to start breaking down this process now that we've laid this, the last, 7 lessons, we kind of laid this foundation. And this today is really kind of this keystone piece that then will basically launch off into the rest of the program. But yeah, having that intention, and then being able to ground that into something that is tangible. So it's like, how do you know that you have realized your full potential? And this is where you can still be creative, and you realize that the intention is the important thing. And then what you choose to ground that, what you choose to create a measurement for that, it really becomes pretty, it's arbitrary. It doesn't really matter that much, but at the same time, it is vital, because it gives you a way to know you are moving in the right direction. So for instance, if I say I want to realize my full potential, then what would be, so this is like the question that I would ask myself, the questions I do ask myself, what would be the kind of ultimate expression of that intention that is something that is, it's tangible. You can check it off on a box. You can see it. You can measure it. You know that it's happened, that it's real, because it's right here in front of you. And so again, like that, this is where it becomes personal for you. Because what is that for you? What does it mean to realize your full potential? And for instance, as an example, because you might have multiple different areas where you're having multiple different intentions, and this is what we're going to ultimately get into very soon, is like breaking down your life types, is what I call them, but essentially like these key archetypes, or these key elements of your life that you want to continuously improve upon. Just as a simple example, it's like you have your physical health, and then you also have like your relationships, your emotional health, and you might have different kinds of intentions for those different areas. But again, the intention is one thing, and it is the vital, it's the key. But then how do you actually know that you are realizing that potential? And that's what I call, you want to have an ultimate intention for each one of these areas. And then you want to have an ultimate result, which is the tangible thing for each one of those areas. You also want to have a purpose, which is kind of the emotional drive that pushes you. And again, this is really like ultimately the process of manifestation, and that's really what we're building here. It's a system to identify your genius, express your genius in ways that are in service to yourself and others to the highest level possible, and then create a system around being able to do that, knowing that you are moving in the direction that you say that you want to head, and like really without question, to the point where you essentially turn your life into a business, in the sense that there's all these systems that are just in place, that once you get them in place, you really don't have to think about them anymore. And in a sense, like you realizing your full potential in whatever objective way you choose to measure that, you doing that is just a natural flow of you just doing what you do. Like it's not like this thing that you have to try super hard to do. It ultimately is the opposite of that. It becomes this surrender to the full expression. And that's kind of like the big paradox here, is like, we do work, we exert effort to kind of put these things into place, to get to a place where everything becomes effortless, because it's all just one system. Okay. And that's ultimately, what I've been creating here. And so just to touch, to close the loop. So a specific result might be like, I want to perform a sold out world tour. Like that might be in one category of my life, which for me it is on my artist life type, my creator life type. So for me, that is the ultimate result, something that's tangible, something that I can measure it, I can see it, that happened, that then would be related to the expression of that intention. But again, for me, the result isn't necessarily the important thing. Like, yeah, that'd be amazing, but for me, it really is the intention is the important thing. But the result gives me something to know that I'm moving in the right direction, and it also gives me a baseline to be able to reverse engineer. Because now that I have like this specific thing, now I can take a look at, okay, based on where I'm at, and I know what I'm moving towards, so I know what I need to measure to know that I'm moving in that direction. So it's like, based on where I'm currently at, based on where I want to go, what does ideally the next year look like? And this is where you set, like, essentially, this is like where all your standard goal setting process come in. So what's the year look like? And then what's 90 days look like? And now we're like really cooking, because now we've got this essentially 12-week block with this specific thing. And then what we've kind of went through in the last lesson is we've identified these key processes, that things that we already love to do, things that we would just do whether or not it was related to any kind of goal or anything, because it's a natural extension of who we are. And so we align everything with that, and then literally, like, that you are moving towards that direction by just doing what you would already do if there were no restraints on anything, on time, money, resources, whatever. You just doing what you're doing. And that is the beauty of it. And I want to quickly break down kind of where I came about all this. I think it is helpful just to have that foundation. And this is a podcast, so you may be listening to it, but I also, on the video version, let me see if you can see that. Maybe. Okay. So this is I did this like about 6 months ago. This was kind of the first iteration, but basically I'm just kind of going to talk through it a little bit. So basically what I started with was the concept of just I am. So it's like, everything is essentially God. It's just all of it. Okay. And then that I am wanted to know itself. So essentially God wanted to know itself. And then this is going to be like a super deep thing, and that we could go hours and hours on, but I'm just going to break it down quickly. So God, which is, source of everything, there's God by definition, that for which there is no other, all of it has no way to know itself, because it needs the complementary opposites. You can't have an experience without the complementary opposites. So if you're everything, if you're zero, fundamentally you're full of everything and yet empty of everything, and that is God. That's why people refer to God as zero, because it's like it's the source of everything, and at the same time it's fundamentally empty of everything. Okay? And then from the zero comes the one. So from the nothingness, from the, just ultimate potential, which is what zero represents, just ultimate potential, there comes the one, which is just everything. It's all of it. But again, one can't know itself. So how does one know itself? It needs to, because one is in perfect harmony. One is in perfect balance. It's just unified with everything. So one has to create the illusion of two, because really there isn't two, because it's just one. But in order for one to know itself, it needs to create the illusion of two. It's basically like God playing hide and seek with itself, where it's like, all right, I'm gonna create this thing over here, then I'm gonna create this thing over here, and now they're gonna have a relationship. And I'm just gonna so happen I'm gonna forget that this is actually me, and I'm just gonna play this game where there's these two separate things. Okay, so now you got hot cold, now you got day night, now you got yin yang. Okay, so there's complementary opposites. And those complementary opposites are necessary to have an experience. And that is what creates this exchange of love. Because, and love has different levels. Love can be very conditional. Love can be like sex and violence love. There's actually, studies on the different stages of love here, which is kind of ties into this. But ultimately, through the process of love, which again is just a process, a unifying force. So ultimate separation is having a relationship with itself. And by having a relationship with itself, it is coming to know itself. And that is kind of the process of love at a fundamental level. And so that expression of that love ultimately is it turns into your genius. Okay. And so what we're going to break down in the lesson is like, how do you identify what that genius is for you, the different expressions of your genius, because then that's going to give you the foundation to break all of it down into essentially what I call the life types. It's like these different aspects of who you are as an expression of your genius, which is an expression of love, which ultimately is you can say is kind of imprinted within the soul that is you, which is the soul is kind of this essence of you that is this connection to everything else. But that's all we got time for. Peace.